The hidden history of the municipality of Ponce. Doña Isabel de la Cruz was a woman of Taíno and African descent from the 17th century. She was one of the first documented women landowners in the southern region of Puerto Rico, specifically in the area known as the Hato del Portugués, which would later become the city of Ponce. Active toward the end of the 17th century, her name is linked to the donation of land used for the construction of a small chapel that served as the spiritual and social center of the emerging settlement of Ponce. For this reason, tradition recognizes her as one of the forerunners of the founding of the city of Ponce. Her name has been erased over time, but she was the legal owner of all the land that makes up the town of Ponce. During the 17th century, Puerto Rico maintained a predominantly rural structure, with few urban centers outside of San Juan. In the south, the lands between the Portuguese and Bucana rivers were worked by Creole families dedicated to cattle raising, sugarcane cultivation, and local trade. Within that environment, several estates and farms under female ownership emerged, a rare phenomenon in Puerto Rico's patriarchal colonial society. It was within this context that Doña Isabel de la Cruz owned these lands. Mentioned by Eduardo Neumann Gandia in his 1913 book Verdadera Historia de la Ciudad de Ponce, she is cited as one of the first individuals and the first identifiable woman to own land in the area where the city of Ponce now stands. According to parish documents and traditions recorded by Cayetano Col y Toste, Isabel de la Cruz is believed to have donated part of her property for the establishment of a chapel dedicated to Our Lady of Guadalupe, around which the first settlers began to gather. Although there are no precise records of her birth, family, or marital status, the fact that she was socially addressed as Doña in that era reveals a respected social position, one reserved for free women with property and community standing. The last name de la Cruz was common among mixed-race families in the southern region, inherited from the Spaniards after they had enslaved the Taínos and African peoples. The fact that we have a figure like Doña Isabel de la Cruz in this era, with the financial means and land she possessed, shows that in Puerto Rico, there were people of color and Taíno heritage who had achieved economic mobility through agriculture, inheritance, or marriage. Her figure thus represents a social group often rendered invisible. Free women of color, who despite racial and gender limitations, achieved economic independence and social respect. The lands of Doña Isabel de la Cruz, located alongside the Portuguese River, were strategically valuable for their fertility and access to water. They included sugarcane, cassava, or tobacco crops, as well as livestock, activities common in the rural economy of the island's southern region. Her decision to donate part of those lands for a chapel reflected her commitment to the community. That religious space eventually evolved into the urban center of Ponce. Although no direct descendants are documented, her name endures as a symbol of the female role in the formation of colonial communities. Historians such as Neumann Gandia and Colya y Toste present her as an example of women's contributions to the very foundations of the Puerto Rican nation. Doña Isabel de la Cruz was not a legend, but a real woman, a free mixed-race woman of the 17th century, who asserted her economic and moral presence in a world that marginalized female voices. Her name, tied to the origin of Ponce, embodies the Afro-Taíno, feminine, and rural heritage of Puerto Rican society. There are no specific records indicating the cause of her death or where she was buried. It is unknown what happened to her heirs. Historians of the time only wrote about how the lands of the municipality of Ponce had belonged to her. She donated some of her land, and afterward, no one wrote about her or researched her life any further. Her story was lost to time. In Puerto Rico, there is no statue, tribute, or memorial in her honor, and that is no coincidence. In colonial society, women, especially free mestizas or mulatas, were rarely considered worthy of historical record. The chroniclers, scribes, and officials who documented life on the island were Spanish or white Creole men who focused on governors, clergy, military figures, or prominent male landowners. Thus, the omission of Isabel de la Cruz's story was not an oversight. It was part of a patriarchal and racial system that refused to exalt women, especially those of Taino or African descent. Isabel de la Cruz was a free woman of mixed ancestry, and her story was likely deliberately marginalized. Mulata or mestiza women could own property, but their authority was not acknowledged in official records beyond the economic transaction itself. A woman of that background who donated land, an act of power and agency, broke the social codes of her time, and that created discomfort within the official narrative. The selective omission and the brief mention of her name without biographical details represent a historical way of erasing women's participation from the foundational historical processes. It was not mere forgetfulness. It was deliberate, active erasure. The narratives of Ponce's founding reproduce the vision of a white, male, and patriarchal society. They mention Isabel's name, but never explore who she truly was, because doing so would have meant acknowledging that a woman, especially one of Taino and African descent, had been the protagonist in the origin of a city. The disappearance of Doña Isabel de la Cruz from Puerto Rico's official history was no coincidence. It was the result of a colonial structure that rendered women and non-white people invisible, even when they were essential to the creation of the nation's economic and spiritual foundations. If this story inspired you, give our page a like and follow us. Discover more about the remarkable women of Puerto Rico who changed the course of our island's history. And if you know of a woman whose story deserves to be told, write to us. We want to give her a voice in an upcoming video. See you next time.